I'll introduce myself. As Davina mentioned, I'm Dave Pisani. I'm the VP of Media and Entertainment at Ampersand. We basically, my main function is sales of tune-in advertising to basically every network out there, broadcast, cable, premium, streamers, and we sell across linear and uh, streaming and addressable, everything anyone wants to buy. And Pato, I looked at your job announcement discovery. It was quite extensive, and I'm like, wow, that's one person's job. So when you let us know exactly what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I'll try and simplify it by a lot. And at the end of the day, my job is to get people to get to know, fall in love, and continue to use Discovery Plus and other streaming services from the company as much as possible around the world. So any piece that kind of ladders up to that objective is under my general remit here at Discovery.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. And there's quite a bit going on in that space. So, in the theme of the 10-year anniversary of Brand Innovators, everyone's sort of been asking a variation of the question. How do you feel marketing and advertising has changed over the past 10 years? I know you've been doing this for a while. You've been at a bunch of different companies. How do you feel it's changed over the past 10 years?
I think there's probably a couple of things that have changed dramatically. The first is, obviously with more access to data, it has made marketers much more informed on what to do, how to do it, how to reach consumers, everything there. And I'll say this for another part of the presentation, but I think there's a dark side to that we're kind of getting into. The second is, the risk of stating the obvious. Marketing now is about a relationship. It's not a one-way conversation. It's about a relationship. And so whatever we do that expands well past paid media is a touch point with our consumers where they get to have a voice back to us. And I think that is particularly empowering for the consumer. And it's particularly scary for brands who are not ready to hear back from consumers. So I think, those two pieces around the science of the data and kind of like the humanity of a conversation are, if I look back over the last 10 years, kind of things that have really changed the way that we go to market with our products and services.
Yeah. And there has been obviously a lot of change. What has been the most surprising change over the past 10 years, would you say?
I would say it's kind of on the second point of kind of having consumers have a channel to give us feedback is how much they're leaning into that, right? Like a lot of people, I think, we often wondered, did marketing and advertising work, and did a brand promise actually work? Did it resonate? And there is no doubt that it resonates positively or negatively because consumers will let you know right away. And I think especially through the year that we went through last year with not just the pandemic, but all of social injustice, where either brands were silent or brands were not silent, but were called out for being unauthentic. It, to me, is a prime example of how a brand really needs to know itself and know when to speak up and when not to speak up, because audiences will call you out in a heartbeat.
Yeah, yeah. And that brings up a good topic. And, the last two sessions touched on this for sure with VW and Frito-Lay. The pandemic affected almost every category of business, negatively in most, for various reasons. TV probably a little different, obviously, because a lot of us were and still are locked down and went to TV to fill time and educate ourselves. How do you think the pandemic? Did you think it changed the way TV is viewed by consumers?
I did, 100%. It accelerated something that was happening well before the pandemic, but with a couple of spotlights that kind of made it a little bit different. So the acceleration is around the general movement of people from a more traditional linear subscription to streaming services, or at least a combination of.
Yeah, that was actually the second part of my question. So yes, exactly.
Yeah, so look, it's no secret that most streaming services benefited from that. I was at Hulu at the beginning of the pandemic, and Hulu and many of the other services were lucky recipients of that extra time that people had at home. But there's a couple other things that were also happening during the pandemic. One is a bunch of new services launched, one of which is Discovery Plus.
Sure.
But HBO Max, Peacock. So it got, some people say crowded, I say just more options. But the point being is that a subscriber now really needs to not only decide, but just understand what service has what content. And it's getting a little confusing. And so we have to, as an industry, work harder to tell people what's where and why to come on one service versus the other. The second thing is, for many services, production slowed down or stopped altogether. So at this time where there's pent-up demand for content, many of the services who were kind of leaning onto new content releases kind of had to face the reality that there wasn't anything because we couldn't shoot, we couldn't produce. So there was this dichotomy of like great demand, but not a lot of new content to give this new demand. But look, if I zoom out, I think we're going to come out of this pandemic, God willing, with just an acceleration of what happened when we went into the pandemic, of people rethinking about their linear subscriptions, but even more so rethinking about how they engage with the various streaming services. I think there might be 2 or 3, I don't know what the number is, that you just kind of keep. And then there's kind of a handful that you're going to rotate in and out of based on, whatever your content wants are at any given point in time. And so our job is to be in one of those top 2 or 3 as much as possible.
Exactly. And that leads me to one of my other questions. Obviously Discovery Networks has a ton of linear networks, and now with Discovery Plus, is there a different way you market a linear network versus, a streaming network?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Just look at the basics. Linear network is very appointment based. A show will launch and air on any specific time. And you kind of have one shot to make sure that that show succeeds. Whereas in streaming services, Discovery Plus included, you don't. You have an infinite library, and as long as the show is new to you, our job is to make sure that we connect you with a content piece that is most relevant to you. So just the timestamp of how we market, it looks very different. Yeah. 2 is, in linear, a lot of it is around any one particular show under the network brand. But in streaming, it's the show that might get you in, but it's the library that keeps you. And so we're not going for a one-off date for the consumer. We're going for a long-term relationship. And so as marketers, we need to make sure that the moment that you come into the service, that we do our best to expose you to other content that might be most relevant to you, and therefore starts to build a more long-term relationship. Because look, on a subscription basis, it's all about lifetime value. It's not about just impressions and ad inventory and racing and ratings. So just literally the KPIs by which we optimize are just drastically different.
Yeah, and I look at the Discovery networks, and I'll be honest, this isn't pandering, but they're on in our house all the time. Food, HG, Discovery, DIY, lifestyle, where you may go to a network like an AMC for 1 or 2 shows, but you'll turn on HG and it'll be on all night, and you'll watch through the various shows. Is there a different way you approach your networks, as opposed to maybe someone would approach, or maybe you did with Hulu in the past?
Yeah, I mean, look, the consumption on Discovery Plus is very reflective of what you're describing in your household. The average hours per consumer on a weekly basis is really healthy, right? And the reason being is, it's just comfort content for the most part, right? When you turn on, any of the shows or the networks that you have, it's just good to have, and you don't need to work too hard at watching it. You can even have it in the background at times. And so for us, honestly, it's about embracing that in terms of where we fit in the universe of entertainment. Because there are plenty of services out there with Netflix and Disney Plus and HBO Max who have the incredible scripted original titles where you want to actively enjoy. But TV viewing is a combination of active and passive, or educational and entertainment. And Discovery Plus fits a very, very specific need in that universe. And so rather than try and compete with the big titles, like that's not us. Like who we
Yeah.
are is we are the purveyors of this content that gives you joy and kind of unexpected fulfillment. And so what you'll see, and we launched a new brand campaign a few weeks ago, is we're really trying to embrace that. And we call it sharpening our edges about knowing who we are and who we're not. And you'll see more of that hopefully in the coming, weeks and months and quarters and whatever else comes after that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I feel like, people talk about reality television, and in the begin, I mean, to me, This Old House was probably the first of the reality TV. It's certainly in the vein of the Discovery Nets. And I think there's multiple categories. There is certainly the interpersonal drama, and then there's sort of the educational yet you have an emotional connection to whether it's food or building or whatever. And HG and food and Discovery, they're not relying on stars. They're sort of developing talent that people get attached to. And how do you approach that? I mean, that's maybe more of a programming thing, but there are people who are doing jobs and now they have TV shows and they have a million fans. I mean, Chip and Joanna and all these different people. So it's an interesting sort of model that's different than probably every other network group.
Yeah, look, without comparing ourselves to other networks, we in many cases, through the incredible work that our programming teams have done with Kathleen and Nancy and others in the leadership side, is we almost create stars as opposed to
Yeah, yeah.
them, right? And the reason that I think they've been repeatedly successful is because there's something about finding talent that is relatable and that is also aspirational. And there's this fine balance of like somebody that you can be, like you want to be friends with, but they're doing something that is just, you want to be there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And look, that talent can be something like Chip and Joanne. The talent can be like, just general content through some of like Love Island and some of the other things that we have. It's different, right? It's that there's almost a sense of voyeurism in some of the shows, or you're peeking into someone's life and you want to relate to them or aspire to be them, depending on what the show is. And it's just fun. I think from a brand promise for Discovery Plus, we've said this multiple times that we're kind of in a category of one, and it's just factually true. That the content that we have is just different. And it may not appeal to everyone. And we also are real enough to know that it's not the only type of content that you want to watch, but we do know that it plays an important part in kind of like that portfolio of your entertainment habits.
Yeah. I'm going to put this on you personally. How do you decide what to watch, and what do you watch? What do you watch? I'm a TV guy. I've been watching since Batman and Johnny Carson up until I have every streaming service. So I love TV. What do you watch?
I'm almost embarrassed to say that what I watch is driven by what my kids or my wife want to watch, because our time together with the TV is limited. And so it's mainly what they watch. But interestingly enough, my daughter, for example, loves HGTV, the Love It or List It shows. Like we will binge watch those for hours.
Yeah, we do.
And we did that well before I joined Discovery Plus. So as a caveat, but look, I think like all of us, word of mouth and kind of hearing what titles are out there. I try, which may sound ironic, but be balanced in how much time I spend in front of a TV versus not. So, we'll do it for entertainment. I'll do a little bit for work, but other than that, I also try and pick up a book or do something outdoors. So
that's good for people out there. There are still books. Yeah. I'm actually saving a book to read when I have to go back on the train back to the office.
There you
read
go.
as many books as I'd like to. We do have questions here, but I have a couple more. So, we've sort of bookended what did you see over the past 10 years? What do you think is coming in the next 10 years? I feel like we're in this, this massive change right now with, 3 years ago, there were hardly any streamers, and now there's a bunch. And, what do the next 10 years look like?
Look, I'll answer it from an industry and then from a marketing perspective. From an industry perspective, this is my hypothesis that there is going to be a reconsolidation and almost a recreation of the bundle. If you pick up to from what I said before, there's just a lot of services out there, and the content is somewhat disparate across these services. And I think consumers are going to be desperate to just find an easy and convenient way to access that content through a centralized place. So I think, look, obviously Discovery is going through a merger right now with Warner Media. There's a lot of that in my opinion will continue to happen, as you know, this is not a cheap industry to be in, and you need
Yeah.
scale to drive scale.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see more of that, especially when you want to play on a global stage. From a marketing perspective, I mentioned at the beginning that there's a little bit of a dark side of the data side. And what I mean by that is I think marketers have kind of lost their creative juices in favor of safety in data.
Yeah.
My personal kind of passion point is that data can help and should help reduce the margin of error, but it doesn't eliminate judgment. And I think, you know, great marketers or great business people for that matter are going to be measured by the judgment calls that they make, that is either supported by or acknowledging by going against what the data says. And you know, it's a fine line to do that. I think data is a wonderful thing, but I think it's in many cases people use it as a crutch versus an enabler. So I don't know if this is going to happen, as much as I hope it happens, that marketers will kind of rediscover the balance between the left side and the right side of our brain, and kind of have a combination of real creativity. And I don't mean just creativity in terms of campaigns, I just mean in the thinking. And then use data to kind of help us judge whether that creativity is moving in the right direction or not.
Yeah. No, I agree. You know, and you know, wanted to touch on data. There is a lot of it, and I do think, you know, everyone's got it, and there's different flavor. I mean, is there something that's tried and true that you rely on data wise, or is that always changing too?
I mean, yes, without going through the roster of all the metrics that we look at, you know, there's 20% of the data that we spend 80% of the time on.
Mm.
And look, I will give you an example of, like, if you look at media mix modeling and optimization, it's easy for a marketer to say, well, here's the 3 channels that work, and so I'm going to put more and more money. But what that doesn't take into account is the implication of the ripple effects of all the pieces and how they work together. And this notion of continuing to reap demand versus seed demand. And I think marketers are increasingly getting asked and pressured to be held accountable to a SAC or CPA, or, you know, whatever cost per acquisition metric.
Yeah.
And that leads you to make very dangerous decisions, because you'll start putting money in channels where you can measure and that look cheap. But over the long term, all you're doing is just squeezing the last drop of juice versus kind of fostering or planting new fruits.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. What I'm just There's some questions coming in here. Someone, your favorite marketing campaign you've worked on? That's
Oh my
open-ended.
gosh. Look, there's been a few actually. Probably the one that hopefully people are most aware of was at Hulu. We worked on the Hulu Has Live Sports campaign, which was built on a great insight, and the creative teams did an amazing job at turning that out. That was just a lot of fun, and it ended up having just a ton of legs for quarters and actually years after that. So it was a ton of fun for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. In the beginning, you mentioned, you know, making connections with consumers, and how do you sort of dig into that two-way street? I think data certainly provides some of that, but what's the best way of connecting with consumers? You know, they do let you know, but like how? And is it the masses, or is it sort of one-offs, or, you know, general consensus of what people like and don't like?
Look, it starts with knowing what your brand promise is and who we are as a brand, because it's think of a brand as a person, right? You are a character regardless of what that character looks like, and it's so important that you stay true to that character. I take that analogy to our brand, and that's what we need to do. So For all of the things that we are, there's a list of things that we are not. So it starts with that and kind of knowing yourself as a brand. Then it's every large touch point and every micro touch point. There is no interaction with a consumer that leaves them neutral. You either improve it or you make it worse. That happens with customer service. That happens with an email. It happens with an ad campaign. It happens every time they log into the product. So unfortunately, the answer is all of it, right? It's really all of it. So as a marketer, our job is, number one, to really be crystal clear on what that brand promise and who we are. And then number two is to work with everybody that has a touch point to the consumer to make sure that we are consistent with that promise as much as possible. And it's a feedback loop, right? So we hear from them and we react to it. And it's just a vicious cycle that just never ends because we just want to do that. But the ultimate KPI there is not retention. Like, retention is a lagging indicator. The ultimate KPI there is, if you think about Net Promoter Score and brand love, right? For us, we're going to be in a world where there's literally hundreds of streaming services. We're not going to win purely on a transactional relationship. We have to win on an emotional relationship. And it's really hard to do. And it takes time. It's just building a relationship with humans. It takes time to build a relationship with a brand. And so it's just showing up every day. You know, anytime somebody says, well, what's the silver bullet? I'm like, there is no silver bullet. The silver bullet is showing up every day and living up to your brand promise. That's the silver bullet.
Yeah. And so you've worked across, insurance, and I know at Yahoo, I don't know how we define Yahoo because they do so many different things, and certainly television. And I feel like people are passionate about everything, but people are certainly passionate about television. I mean, how do you weigh the differences between insurance, a Yahoo, Hulu, Discovery, and from your experience, like, is TV have more, interaction with people than, say, insurance? I mean,
no, and this may not be a popular answer, but I think the category that you work in is secondary to the opportunity that you have. When I joined Farmers Insurance more than a handful of years ago now, the reason why I joined is because they wanted to really get bigger on the digital side of the business, and so it was an opportunity to build, right? And look, insurance may not be the most sexy of industries, but it doesn't matter, because at least for me, what drives me to wake up every morning and show up is around the opportunity to be an inflection point for the business, right? Is to be able to look back and say, would this business have been in this same position had I not been here? And if the answer is yes, then that's boring. Then I don't want to be there, right? I want to be in a place where I can look back and say, okay, I actually played a role in changing the trajectory of this company. And that trajectory change can happen because of the industry, because of the company, because of the role, because of the timing. So there's multiple factors that go into that. But the industry is just one of them, to be honest with you. And I'll be the first to admit that I got completely lucky to kind of join Hulu when I joined, kind of at the beginning of this like streaming revolution with everybody wanting to jump in. And it's been extremely fun. And obviously, I'm not gonna lie, like, being in an entertainment industry is fun. And it's always fun at party. Your conversation goes longer at a dinner party when you say you work in the entertainment industry than you work in insurance, maybe. But other than that, to me, I've found out, at least in retrospect, that it doesn't matter.
Going back to and some of the other, they talk about tactics. There are more than ever. I mean, I started in this business when we were selling TV, local spots, and radio, and there wasn't newspapers. I mean, that's a while back. Now there's so much more. Do you try to use all of it? The last folks were mentioning TikTok and Spotify and all these different things. Like, how do you decide what works the best? And does it change by the different brands? Because there are a number of different tactics that work better for brands than others.
Yeah. Look, first and foremost is, where's our audience? If our audience is not on TikTok, I'm not going to buy TikTok.
Sure.
And this is nothing against TikTok, but just in general, right? It's going back to being truthful on who you are and who your match is from an audience perspective. So with that premise, typically the way that we've thought about it is there's call it a 60-30-10. 60% is tried and true. It's like your horsepower of channels and mediums that work. 30% is channels that are kind of or mediums or whatever it is that have potential and have shown potential through earlier testing, and you want to continue to evolve and see how they do. And then 10% is net new, like completely new, whether it's a vendor, whether it's whatever it is, right? Just in the spirit of making sure that we're following where our consumers are. But we don't feel compelled that only because a specific platform or specific vendors having their day in the spotlight that we need to be there. Like we try and resist that temptation. We try and again stay true to just be where our consumers are first and foremost, and kind of flesh it out that way.
With Discovery Plus, and you've certainly seen a lot of their ads, across your networks and everywhere else. So initial phase seemed like it's met or exceeded expectations. I guess I'm asking that question, but I've read different things.
It has. So, the service launched in January of this year. I think we communicated that we had about 15 million subscribers as of our last earnings. So the short answer is yes. But anyone who's in this place will tell you that the first 15 are easier than the second 15, than the third 15, just because you have to work harder and harder to find those audiences. But we continue to feel very confident in the product that we have, the content that we have, and kind of our ability to continue to find audiences that can relate to this content. Because as we were saying before, there's a need and a place for this content, and our job is to let people kind of know that. So
yeah. And it does seem like, streaming services, and they vary. Some start out with all originals, some start out with their library. I feel like Discovery Plus was sort of both. I mean, I've seen the commercials for, like, that's a show. There's a lot of sort of super niche shows that are being tested or on there. And then there's the tried and true that you could watch, the flipper flops and all that kind of stuff. That's an interesting decision, and how do you market differently between, people know they want to catch up on, what the tried and true, and then here's all the new ones that are coming.
Well, the new shows are particularly important to differentiate the service, and it gives a reason for people to come in and try it. The deep library is important to keep people on the service. So they play a role, and you'll see in our marketing that we do, title specific marketing, but we also do brand and library specific. Our latest campaign is called like the streaming home of, and we have the streaming home of paranormal, of true crime, of, reality and family. And so there's categories of content that are then accentuated by specific titles within each of those. But again, that's one thing that we can do with just a ton of conviction, because we have more of that content than most other services. And when it comes to unscripted or reality or whatever you want to call it, bar none, we are the leader in that space. So we feel really good. And leader is defined not just by number of titles, but just like kind of being known for bringing great content like that to our consumers. So yeah, we're excited.
Exactly. And I mean, do you see that evolving differently over the next couple of years? And it's a broad library, and it's as and the other, I'm jumping around here. The other thing is, with a direct connection for streaming, you sort of know precisely what people are watching and what people don't. Will that affect what you bring in as new programming?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, we look at consumption on the platform daily to understand what drives subscriber health and what drives subscriber demand, both for purposes of existing subscribers, but also for purposes of bringing in new subscribers. And what kind of content pops. It informs our marketing. It obviously informs our content strategy. And look, if and when something happens on the merger side, that kind of changes the game. But for now, we are kind of heads down on kind of making sure that this service continues to be successful and relevant for consumers.
Yeah, and is it with the streaming being relatively new? Does it make it easier? And I know you've been at Discovery less than 6 months, I guess, but beforehand you were sort of relying on third-party data, I guess, more than anything. But now you do have you have a lot of first-party data. Does that make it easier? Does that change things? I mean, data seems to be a big part of obviously, network groups getting into streaming and things like that.
Yeah, look, it's extremely important. The first party data gives us kind of a front row seat at how people engage with us. It is important to marry that with third party data, because I may know that you're watching shows 1, 2, and 3 on Mondays and Thursdays, but what I don't know is who you are, through psychographic segmentation, demographics, and all the third party data that's out there. So
Yeah.
kind of trying to paint a picture of who you are is really difficult with just first party data. So it's the combo of the two that makes it really, really powerful, both for me as a marketer, but as we sell ads on Discovery Plus. So for the ad sales team, it is particularly powerful because we can now go to our advertising partners and make sure that we match their message to the right consumer. So there's extreme precision that we can have with this for first party data.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's interesting. And so there's 2 tiers, I believe, right? There's an ad supported tier and a premium, I guess. I'm hoping the ad supported tier is well supported, because that's sort of my business. So we want to keep selling ads. I'll take the ad supported tier on some of the streaming nets. I mean, I think it's part of the television experience to me. I mean, so that's interesting. As far as the linear nets, it's interesting because there's a lot of, so there's sort of the main nets, the Discovery, no offense to the others, the food and nets to those. Like food there's food and cooking, there's HG and DIY. And I find myself watching all of them too. Is there, a different A channel against the B channel?
Sorry, you actually broke up there a little bit on the last part of your question.
So what I was saying was there are the main sort of lifestyle nets, HG and food, and then there are cooking and say DIY. And is there a different way to approach how you look at those sort of main nets versus sort of the other nets?
Yeah, I mean, look, a big part of our audience and value proposition is around people who are cord cutters or cord nevers. And for those audiences, the networks mean a lot less, right? So the fact that it's on HGTV or DIY or whatever it is almost irrelevant. So for Discovery Plus, we're focusing a lot more, and you'll see us focus a lot more on the actual titles than the networks. Mm-hmm. The networks right now are there, and they play an important role for navigation for people who are core plusers, people who have an avid affinity for the brand from the linear subscription. But there's this entire other audience who honestly just don't know what those networks are. So we have to find the right balance, and the lowest common denominator that normalizes everything is the titles. If a title does really well, it doesn't matter what network it was on. For us, what it matters is that we need to elevate that title and expose it to as many consumers as possible.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I mean, I do feel sometimes sort of working in this business, do I approach it differently? Do you feel that, you're in this television business, do you approach it differently than a typical consumer? I feel like I probably get in the weeds too much on this net versus this and things like that.
Yeah, I think we have the temptation to do that. And one of the things that we work really closely with our media and acquisition team is some things you do because you just know it to be right, even if you can't quite prove it. And then some things you do it to measure true incrementality, which kind of goes back to like where there's value in data and buying media that is actually creating demand versus just harnessing it. And so that's what drives us to test different things and kind of get lost sometimes in the details of like, well, but is it truly the message, or is the audience or the platform? Like, what is it that's driving this demand? Because this is a marathon, and we're going to win this like literally one step at a time, and one step equals a new creative, a new platform, a new targeting, a new whatever it is. So I think the beauty and the fear of marketing is that a lot of people think that it's just one big campaign and there you go, you have it, and the reality is it's truly not. It's grinding it on a daily basis, and showing up on a daily basis through kind of what we do, and ultimately how it shows up to our consumers.
Yeah, that's
big campaigns are fun and they're amazing and they play a role, but that's the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Our at Ampersand, my division is separate from the core advertisers, and and it's for a reason. There's a lot of networks, but everything we do is very short spurts. We're not. There are autos who buy for the full year and things like that. Is your cycle different than because it's a constant changing thing with multiple brands and multiple new shows coming out, as opposed to a much longer term planning season kind of thing?
It's still fairly long term, so we definitely try and plan. There are key beats, like any business, key priority beats that we want to kind of focus around. Those beats could be around content, like Shark Week or an original. They could be product or something else. So we do focus around those because we want to make sure that we are highlighting the big pieces. But then there's this level of just like always on, that kind of, as we see things perform or not, we kind of pull up and down into our improvement strategy.
Okay, interesting. Davina has joined us. I hope there's a fun fact. Davina, I don't want to put you on the spot.
There's always a fun fact. Yes, I have a fun fact. Before that, thank you guys. This was great. Obviously close to our heart.
For sure.
Entertainment business. So a few takeaways, Pato. Just what I kind of heard, just to summarize for the audience, is it really starts with who the brand is, be where the consumer is first and foremost, choose a media partner that matches from an audience perspective. Marketing's about a relationship, not a one-time connection. I also love that you said that the challenge for marketers today is that, the consumer has a voice back, and we've got to be able to figure out how to manage that. And then data, we love data at Ampersand, and focus where the true incrementality is. And when it comes to data, the combination of first and third party data assets are valuable. Fun fact. Okay, fun fact. So 10 years ago, Discovery had just acquired Scripps Networks, and I'm not going to talk about what could possibly happen in 2022 with the recent news. But something, I used to work at TiVo, and Dave Zaslav was on the board of TiVo. And that was when consumers were just starting to get comfortable with time shifting. And now that's a norm that we're in. So, I agree that consolidation will continue in the years to come, and especially if you want to be in the global stage. So there you go.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Pato. Appreciate it. Appreciate being with us.
All right. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, guys. So now we're going to have Lisa McKnight join us from Mattel. She is the Senior Vice President of Barbie and Global Head of